How to specify and handle exceptions in Java effectively. In Java, handling exceptions effectively is key to building robust, maintainable applications. So let's go through a top 10 list of best practices for handling exceptions. Number 1, use checked and unchecked exceptions appropriately. Checked exceptions, which are subclasses of exception, not runtime exception, should be used for situations where the caller might be reasonably expected to handle the error. These would be exceptions like file not found exception, socket timeout exception, or SQL exception. Those are some examples. Also, you should avoid overusing checked exceptions, as this can clutter your code with excessive try-catch blocks. On the other side, unchecked exceptions, which are subclasses of runtime exception, should be used for situations that are likely unrecoverable. Some common examples of this are null pointer exception and illegal argument exception. Number 2, throw and catch specific exceptions. Always throw the most specific exception that accurately describes the problem. For example, when input is invalid, throw an illegal argument exception instead of a generic exception. And on the other end, avoid catching overly broad exceptions like generic exception or throwable, as that can make debugging difficult. So throw and catch specific exceptions. Number 3, catch and handle exceptions close to their source, meaning catch exceptions as close as possible to the point where you can handle it. For example, if a method encounters an exception, handle it immediately rather than passing it up the call chain, unless it's absolutely necessary. In general, only propagate exceptions when you don't know how to handle them in the current context. Number 4, log exceptions, don't swallow them. Never catch an exception and do nothing with it. At the very least, log the exception so that that issue is not silently ignored. You can use standard logging frameworks like SLF4j or Log4j for this. Number 5, wrap and rethrow exceptions when needed. What I mean is, if you catch a low-level exception, you can provide more context for higher-level code by wrapping that original exception in a custom one. But always include the original exception when wrapping so that the stack trace is preserved. Number 6, use try with resources. This feature automatically closes resources like streams or sockets or database connections. This will really simplify your code by eliminating explicit finally blocks only needed to do resource cleanup. Number 7, don't use exceptions for flow control. Exceptions in general are expensive to create and to handle, and using them for flow control makes your code harder to understand and maintain. Number 8, create custom exceptions for specific error conditions. For better readability, create custom exceptions for specific error conditions that can occur within your application. Just make sure that these custom exceptions follow proper naming conventions and extend either runtime exception if unchecked or generic exception if you want a checked exception. Number 9, consider global exception handling. For Spring-based application, use the controller advice annotation for centralized exception handling across controllers. Or similarly, in Java EE applications, you can use the exception handler annotation to globally handle exceptions. And number 10, always provide meaningful messages. When throwing an exception, include a descriptive message that explains the error and, if possible, provide information on how to correct it. This can greatly reduce the time spent troubleshooting. So that's the top 10 list. By following these best practices, you can ensure your Java applications handle exceptions gracefully, making them easier to debug and to maintain. For specific questions about this or any other topic, reach out to Ask the Team at KeyholeSoftware.com.